Speaker, my first question is to the Premier. Does the Premier believe that Canada needs a Charter of Rights?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Leader of the Opposition, what Canada needs, and Ontario needs, and Toronto needs is democracy. Democracy. My friends, I want to remind the Leader of the Opposition that 2.3 million people voted for the PC party. This is about preserving the will of the people. This is about preserving democracy. The Leader of the Opposition, the people will decide, and through you, Mr. Speaker, the people will decide in 4 years. The people will decide in 4 years, and I'll tell you who won't decide. A politically appointed judge by one person. The people of Ontario will decide if they want to move forward with saving people taxes, reducing higher rates.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Stop the clock. Start the clock. Supplementary.
Well, newsflash for the Premier, our democracy is upheld by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country. Speaker. However, earlier this week, while the Premier was trying to justify overriding the Charter so that he could continue his vendetta against the voters of Toronto, the Premier stated that he, and only he, had the right to decide what was best for Ontario. Does the Premier think that there should be any checks at all on his power?
Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, this bill we're introducing was introduced to fix the gridlock down at City Hall, the gridlock that took the factory worker, the construction worker, the person in the office over an hour to get to work down here. My friends, we're going to make sure that we take care of the housing crisis, to make sure we take care of the crumbling infrastructure underneath our feet, and to make sure transit gets moving. Unlike the Leader of the NDP, the Leader of the NDP is here to protect her crony buddies, Mike Layton, Joe Cressy, Gord Perks.
Premier will take a seat. Okay, I need to remind the members that we are not to ascribe motive. That's totally outside of the rules of the House, the traditions of the House. I would ask all members to cease doing that. Supplementary. Final supplementary.
Here's the facts. The Premier rammed through undemocratic changes to Toronto's elections, changes that he didn't have the guts to mention at all during the election campaign. A judge ruled that that wasn't just reckless and irresponsible, but a violation of people's basic rights guaranteed by our Charter. And now the Premier is going to override the Charter of Rights for the first time in Ontario's history just to get his way. Our democratic rights, our democracy, includes an independent judiciary and a free media to protect people from politicians who believe an electoral majority is the mandate, gives them the mandate to trample on people's rights. Why does this Premier believe that democracy means he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants?
Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, here again, the Leader of the Opposition is down here protecting politicians, downtown NDP politicians' jobs. That's what the Leader of the Opposition is. Again, worrying about her buddy Joe Cressy, Mike Layton, Perks, Fletcher. That's what the Leader of the Opposition is worried about. I've yet to hear once the Leader of the Opposition worry about her own constituents in Hamilton. The people in Hamilton, when I visited, need jobs. They want lower taxes. They want lower hydro rates. That's what the people of Hamilton want. They want to make sure they have a voice for the people and we will make sure we deliver our promises, and the people will decide over the next 4 years.
My next question is for the Premier, and I prefer to speak for myself. Thank you very much, Premier. I really prefer to speak for myself. And what I'm here to do is actually to protect the interests of all Ontarians. That's what I'm here to do today, Speaker. That's what I'm here to do every day. Hamiltonians, Torontonians, and all Ontarians. Look, the Premier has stated that his personal vendetta against his enemies at Toronto City Hall is so important that he is compelled to recall this legislature to override the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in order to get that done. If it was so important to this Premier, why did he not mention it a single time during the election campaign that just ended?
Premier.
Leader of the Opposition, as I was crisscrossing Toronto, talking to tens of thousands of people, they were frustrated. They know the City of Toronto is the most dysfunctional political system in all of Canada. They're frustrated with traveling hours to work. They're frustrated with the high taxes. They're frustrated with transit not being built. The people of Scarborough are frustrated that Scarborough subway was voted 8 times. David Miller couldn't build transit. Rob Ford couldn't build transit. And neither...
You're making a feud. They're all going to throw up there. You're making the whole gallery sick.
Member for Essex, please come to order. The House will come to order so I can deal with this. I'm now addressing the people in the gallery. We welcome you here today to observe the debate, but you cannot participate and you can't demonstrate in any way. Wow. Premier.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Speaker. We're here to serve the people.
We have to be able to debate without this disruption. If it continues, we will have to clear the gallery, and you'll have to leave. Premier can finish his answer. The House will come to order. The House will come to order. Official opposition will come to order. Order. I'm sorry. We're going to have to clear the galleries. We have to clear the galleries. Clear the galleries. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition on her first supplementary.
Speaker, I don't have a Premier to give my supplement to. My first question was to the Premier. He's not here to give a supplement to.
Yeah, you can't make reference to the absence of any member, but you can put your question to the government. Again, I recognize the Leader of the Opposition on her supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. My second part of my second question is to the Premier. The people of Ontario are looking for a government to provide good schools for their kids, decent health care for their loved ones, and jobs that you can raise a family on. But when they look to this Premier for his priorities, all they see is someone obsessed with his enemies on Toronto City Council. So obsessed, he's going to toss aside the Charter of Rights to get what he wants. So obsessed that senior citizens are being taken out of our chamber in handcuffs so that he can get his way. Why is this the Premier's top priority, Speaker?
Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'll remind the Leader of the Opposition, we were elected on making sure we fix this city. We were elected to make sure that we fix the infrastructure. We make sure the hardworking people that took an hour, hour and a half to get down to work today downtown, that they're going to have proper transit, proper subways to get them from point A to point B in a rapid fashion. Unlike the NDP, from the day the leader of the opposition came down here, the opposition leader was worried about protecting her political paid activists, making sure she protects the downtown NDP councillors that haven't even registered to run. The NDP is worried about one thing: raising taxes, having the highest carbon tax in the entire country, $2 a litre gas.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, I will ask members on both sides of the House to cease and desist imputing motive in the course of their questions. Final supplementary.
Well, Speaker, we all know who pays for their activists. We saw it during the election campaign. Members of this legislature, Speaker, we could be tackling the real emergencies that Ontario families are facing currently, like lead in school water, for example, wait times in our hospitals, 80,000 Ontario jobs lost in 1 month under this leadership, this Premier's leadership. Instead, he called us here to cut the size of Toronto City Council and override the Charter to do it. The Premier is trampling on people's basic rights to pass a law that he didn't even have the guts to campaign on. Right. Why can't the Premier just take a step back? Take a deep breath, count to 10 for goodness sakes, accept that there is a more pressing priority, there are many more pressing priorities than his petty vendetta against his old enemies at City Hall.
Thank you. Thank you. Premier.
Well, through you, Mr. Speaker, Leader of the Opposition, at least we can count to 10. Unlike you folks, I know you get your budgets mixed up. I know that you were off about $5 billion, but we're there to save the taxpayers' money. We're there to put money back into the taxpayers' pocket. We're there to make sure we speak for the will of the people and uphold democracy. That's why we are here. We were elected to represent the people of this great province. We are here to make sure, again, we lower taxes, lower higher rates.
Order. Order. Start the clock. Supplementary.
Taking away fundamental rights is an extremely serious measure, Speaker, and this is why Ontario has never, ever before invoked the notwithstanding clause. But after doing it once, it becomes easier to do it again. Indeed, after casually invoking the notwithstanding clause to indulge his personal Toronto obsession, the Premier said, and I quote, he won't be shy, unquote, about suspending charter rights again.
Unbelievable.
If the courts rule against him again. Now, I think that the Attorney General understands the role of the courts in upholding democracy in our country and our province, and if she doesn't, she should go back to law school, Speaker. Why is the Attorney General putting the Premier above the law and normalizing the suspension of fundamental charter rights?
Members, please take your seats. Next question, member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question to the Deputy Premier. Premier Ford has threatened to employ the notwithstanding clause to violate our fundamental rights whenever there is a court decision that stands in his way. Premier Ford's intentions are chilling. The notwithstanding clause can be used to override fundamental rights like freedom of religion, or even our right to life, liberty and security of the person. As the right hand to Mr. Ford, does the Deputy Premier support overriding our Charter of Rights and Freedoms to satisfy the whims of a would-be dictator, or will the Deputy Premier—
First of all, Yeah, we refer to each other by our writing or our official name. You can't refer to the Premier that way. Secondly, you have to withdraw.
Withdraw.
Response, Deputy Premier.
Well, through you,
Through
Mr. Speaker.
Ignorant.
Member
The will of the
for
people.
Essex, come to order. And with I'm going to ask the member for Essex to withdraw. Premier.
He's being mean to me. Petty and mean.
Doesn't surprise me.
No.
Anyway, through you, Mr. Speaker, the will of the people will decide on this legislature in 4 years. Not an appointed judge by one person, a politically appointed judge. My friends, do you know what people are worried about? People are worried about being gouged by the government. They're worried about getting a good paying job. And when I was in Hamilton, I talked to dozens of people that felt they weren't being represented in the Leader of the Opposition's area. They were unemployed. You know why they were unemployed? Because the Leader of the Opposition is too worried about protecting her political friends.
Thank you. Thank you. Take your seat. Please take your seat. Please take your seat. The Premier will please take his seat. Supplementary question.
Thank you, Speaker. Back to the Deputy Premier. It's clear by now that the Premier is willing to take the nuclear option when a less damaging option is available. But in a democracy, the government is more than just one person. The Conservative Party sold the people of Ontario on the belief that Mr. Ford's cabinet would keep his worst impulses in check. As the highest-ranking member of the cabinet after the Premier, will the Deputy Premier do the right thing, keep the Premier in check, and step up to stop his vendetta against the Toronto City Council?
Once again, I'm going to ask members to stop imputing motive in their questions or in their statements in this House. Premier, respond.
My friends, do you know who's going to keep us all in check, Mr. Speaker? The people are going to keep us in check. They're going to decide if the government is in better shape than we were before. The people will decide.
Please come to order.
Mr. Speaker, I think
Opposition will come to order.
No, keep going, sir. Keep going.
they're out of control, Mr. Speaker, like usual. My friends, what is going to keep us in check are
The opposition will please come to order. Premier, respond.
This is about preserving the will of the people, Mr. Speaker. It's about preserving the rights of the people. It's about letting them decide who they're going to vote for, and I can sure there's going to be a few people missing on the other side in the next election. My friends.
Thank you.
Is he going to make us go missing?
Order.
Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Speaker, in response to the Ontario Superior Court ruling striking down a flawed Bill 5, the Premier made a hasty decision to invoke the notwithstanding clause, something that has never been done before in Ontario. It is seldom used because it overrides our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is a measure of last resort. It suspends people's civil liberties. The Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms are there to guide us as lawmakers and, most importantly, protect all of us. Speaker, the Premier knows there are other remedies available to him. Reasonable people are asking if he's willing to use it in this circumstance, where else will he use it? So To the Premier, did the Premier ask the advice of the Deputy Premier, the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Cabinet, or the Deputy Attorney General before making his decision?
The Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the representative from Ottawa South and the minivan party, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, they didn't have to worry about that because they had more political scandals, billions of dollars of waste. There was no party in the history of this government that was more politically corrupt than their party, Mr. Speaker. There has been no party at all. We are down here thanks to the Liberals because they wasted billions and billions of dollars at taxpayers' money. They had scandal after scandal after scandal. No matter if it was e-health, no matter what it was, there was billions of dollars wasted. And my friends, you'll be hearing about the billions of dollars that were wasted. The Auditor General came out and said they were cooking the books. I can tell you, they were more than cooking the books. They were frying the books.
I'm going to ask the Premier to withdraw.
Draw.
Supplementary.
Speaker, I'll take that as a no. And somebody should check your material. It's a bit stale. The Premier's impulsive decision to invoke the notwithstanding clause has not been fully thought through and is wrong. Did the Premier consult with the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney? Did he seek the advice of the former Progressive Conservative Attorney General Roy McMurtry? Did he pick up the phone and call Mike Harris, who, if you remember, when he amalgamated cities across Ontario, did a public consultation? Speaker, we'll be filing a reason amendment. Impatience is not a good reason to take such an extreme measure. Speaker, through you to the Premier, will the Premier let the cooler heads in his caucus prevail, not suspend people's rights, and refrain from invoking the notwithstanding clause?
Premier.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the member of Ottawa South, you're going to be the last person I take advice about running a government down here.
Absolutely.
You have destroyed this province for years to come. Every single taxpayer in Ontario are going to be paying for years from their mistakes. Years and years and years of billions of dollars. It was tax, 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 spend, spend, spend. And who lifted the Liberals up? But the leader of the NDP. They stood side by side with the Liberals, wasting billions of dollars.